Hello and welcome to the Holistic Counselling and Psychotherapy Tutor. Please feel free to like, follow, share and subscribe, and feel free to put comments in the box below. Today we're going to take a little look about how power and oppression affects or impacts on the therapeutic relationship. I'm hoping this will be a helpful vision for my own students and for anybody else wanting to little bite-sized bit of learning around power and oppression in the therapeutic relationship. It's important that we find those terms. What is power and what is oppression? So let's take a couple of definitions from the Cambridge Dictionary. So if we're thinking about power, it's the ability to control people and events, or it's the amount of political control a person or a group has within a country, within a society. If we think about oppression, it's a situation in which people are governed in an unfair and cruel way and prevented from having opportunity and freedom. Is that lack of equality, lack of opportunity, lack of experiencing and freedom because of a governance which is unfair and cruel. So these are kind of definitions of power and oppression. By the end of this video, I'm hoping that you'll all be able to kind of name 3 aspects of power that operate in therapeutic relationships. So when we think about therapy and we think about how we're providing therapeutic interventions for clients, we need to think about power really in 3 ways. We need to think about role power, we need to think about societal power, and we also need to think about historical, intergenerational power, because all 3 will be present in some way, sense or form within a therapeutic relationship. What has gone on back there, this is Jacob's triangle of insight, what goes on back there historically, what goes on out there in society is going to have an impact in what goes on in that therapeutic relationship. So it's kind of naive, I think, for therapists to think that power does not operate at all within a therapeutic space, or that the automatic assumption that what you're providing is absolutely equal and fair, and life doesn't work like that. The reality is, particularly in British society, where we're operating quite often we definitely have a class system, right, in the UK. And there is a role power that is either placed on us or that we take as in our role as therapists. So if we think about the work of Gillian Proctor, who writes beautifully on power in the therapeutic relationship, Gillian Proctor says, power inherent in the roles of therapist and client that results from the authority given to the therapist to define the client's problem, and the power which the therapist has within the organisation or institution in which they work. The very fact that you're providing therapy gives you a degree of role power within your agency or within your organisation. Equally, clients will come into therapy and give you a degree of power just as a consequence of your role, the job that you are doing, the work that you are doing. So whatever the context of a therapist's work, right, power is still given to those people within society that are identified as therapists, right? There is a degree of power that comes with that. And that's the role power in therapy, how that operates. Societal power is the power arising from the respective structural positions in society. So if we're thinking certainly in the UK, we have kind of class systems, etc. So there will be some societal power that plays out within the space from the structural positions that both therapist and client have within the wider society. So when we're thinking about these kind of structural positions, we're thinking about kind of dominant and marginalised groups and the impact that this has on power and oppression. We're also considering the position of other characteristics that exist in society and how our society functions in that way. So we might be thinking about age, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, race, disability, religion, class, education. All of these characteristic parts of identity operate or can be experienced as either dominant or oppressive within our societal structure. And these, to some extent or another, will be very present in the therapeutic space. It's not uncommon for me for supervisees perhaps who are seeing a client who they believe has a higher position to them in society, and that can have some impact on relationships, both for the client and for the therapist. So we're not only thinking about role power and how that plays out or can play out in the therapeutic relationship, we're also thinking about societal power and the impact that a kind of range of characteristics can play out in the space. So we're thinking of that kind of balance between power and oppression and how that works on a societal level within the dynamic of the therapist and client relationship. And then we can think about historical power, okay? So we're really then thinking about the experience of power and oppression resulting from the personal histories, intergenerational historical histories of both the therapist and the client. And this kind of intergenerational or kind of historical experience will have some impact on how each individual in that space, both the therapist and the client, it will have an impact on how both view their world, exist in their world, how they think, feel, and behave in the therapeutic relationship. We are all affected by the historical power that exists, whether that is an experience of dominance, or whether that's an experience of oppression, or whether that is a kind of real intersectionality and various different experiences around different intersections of identity. And real good points of reflection. You know, if you're a therapist and you're really wanting to start to think about how power might operate with your therapeutic relationships with clients, I would encourage you, first of all, to kind of start to reflect in terms of role power. A useful point of reflection is to really examine your theoretical perspective. How were you trained? What was the theory that you were taught? And what position does that place you in terms of your role power? So what does your theory say about your role as a therapist, who you must become in a therapeutic space for a client? Okay, what does your theory say about the power dynamic of the therapeutic relationship? And you can add to that then the expectations, perhaps, or the role power that's placed in you in your workplace by clients or from your clients towards you in the space. If you're wanting a good point of reflection perhaps around societal power, is really to start to consider your own structural position within society. What power oppression occurs as a result of your own kind of structural societal position. You can start to kind of develop that self-awareness, understanding of yourself. You'll be in a much better position to be able to identify and see the dynamic as it occurs, the client and their experiences of it. I really like the work of people like Dr. Aisha Mackenzie Mavinga around this. Gillian Proctor's fantastic around power and oppression. And also Dwight Turner quite recently with this kind of idea of intersectionality of identity. I think it's a useful framework to use to start to reflect on societal power and your own structural position within society. Again, you know, reflect on your own historical power. Consider your own personal history of power and oppression. How do you feel? Really think about how these experiences may have affected you. How does your historical experience of power and oppression impact you now? How has it affected you and informed you? How does it play out in your lived experience? Really important that we're kind of developing self-awareness around this. So there's a quick summary. I'm hoping that's a kind of bite-sized introduction to power and oppression and its significance and importance in therapeutic relationships. So a quick summary: the power we assume in our roles as kind of counsellors or psychotherapists has an impact on the therapeutic relationship, and this is called role power. Our structural place within society, alongside our client's structural place in society, has an impact on the therapeutic relationship. This is societal power. Our own and our client's personal lived experiences, history of power and oppression will impact the therapeutic relationship. This is historical power. So we see three forms of power that play out. And if we're going to begin or start to work towards addressing these power dynamics that can play out within our relationships with clients, we really need to consider the power we assume due to our role as counsellors alongside the power that clients place in us. And that can look like clearly negotiating client contracts, being really clear about our ethical positioning, particularly in terms of client autonomy, really focusing on that ethical responsibility for beneficence is helpful. These are kind of starts. Addressing societal power really requires us again to reflect and explore our own structural position in relation to power and oppression and the impact or effects that has on our kind of attitudes, beliefs, and our interactions in relationships. We really need to start to see clients as socially positioned individuals and develop an awareness of the potential impact of this without assuming or judging a client's experience. We do not want to make assumptions around oppression or dominance, but we do want to see clients as socially positioned individuals and consider the potential impact of this. When we're thinking about addressing historical power, that requires us again to consider our own and our clients' lived experiences of power and oppression and how that affects the relationship dynamics between client and therapists. Always helpful, I think, to develop an awareness of what triggers us to feel powerful and what triggers us to feel powerless in relationships, and also developing an understanding of the client's triggers in terms of those things. What helps the client feel powerful? What kind of triggers the client in experiencing a powerlessness? Equally, if you're wanting to read more around this, and I would encourage all of certainly my students to do that. Kirsten Amis writes a great book, Boundaries, Power and Ethical Responsibility in Counselling and Psychotherapy. The work of Gillian Proctor is fantastic. She writes a great book, The Dynamics of Power in Counselling and Psychotherapy. Sharon Anderson, Explorations of Diversity, Examining Privilege and Oppression in a Multicultural Society, is also a great book. Thanks for watching. Please do like, follow, share. Please hit the subscribe button. Look forward to seeing you, hopefully, on my next video.